Hey, Simpson, I'm feeling a mite peckish. Mind if I chew your ear?
Dad, you killed the zombie Flanders.
You was a zombie?
It's Brittany, bitch.
And the Iraq, everywhere, like, such as.
I'm supposed to be the franchise player, and we're in here talking about practice.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Out, Charlie! Out!
Our next door neighbors are foreign countries.
I call upon all nations to do everything they can to stop these terrorist killers. Thank you. Now watch this drive.
Hey everybody, and welcome to Remember Shuffle. My name is Ben. With me as always is my co-host Giordano.
Zombie.
Voice of an angel.
Sorry, I got something in my eye on the walk over here. On my way over to the Troy Duffy Studios. I'm sure it's fine. Don't worry about it.
I love that we have just written it into the lore that our studios is called the Troy Duffy Studios. That fucking rocks. Will not be appreciated by most people.
I have been sincerely saying the line to people recently. Well, there's two types of people. There's doers and there's talkers.
So fucking true.
One of my favorite lines, not from the Boondock Saints, but from the Boondock Saints 2, All Saints Day.
Could you describe more? What do they do, each of these groups of people?
Well, you see, talkers, all they do is talk. I don't think he actually says the doers part, but you know where he's going.
Yeah. Hey, it's our spooky season episode. It's October. We got to do a spooky season episode every year. And this is our zombies episode, a much requested subgenre to do an episode on in the comments. Yeah, this is an episode that Giordano kind of had to drag me kicking and screaming to do because of my own profound sense of shame. Because listener, when I was in high school, circa 2004 to 2008, I was a huge fucking zombie dork. I watched the old shit. I watched the contemporary shit. I watched it all back in the day. And I look back with great shame on this period of my life.
I said this on one of our earlier Halloween episodes, either Donnie Darko or The Slender Man. I do have appreciation for the fact that horror fans, as a group, they may like this stuff that I consider to be kind of stupid, but they do support B movies and amateur-ish productions. I think it probably has one of the most passionate fans for independent film works.
Yes, I got way more respect for any super fan of the Paranormal Activity franchise than I do an MCU super fan. Let me put that on the record.
I actually liked all of the movies we watched for this week's episode, both the main feed and Patreon. I like watching a zombie movie. I'm just like you with The Sopranos. I'm just naturally never going to find myself seeking it out. The same way that I think about rotting flesh and undead corpses. That's how you think of Italians, right? I have a similar sensibility about decaying zombified flesh.
A primal sense of revulsion and disgust. Yeah.
Right, exactly. You get it. Cleaver is kind of the nice meeting point for both of us. It's a movie that Christopher makes in season 6 that is a 2000s zombie slasher film.
And I think for our hook for this episode, in the same way that James Bond films both predate and post-date the 2000s, so you can use them as a kind of canary in the coal mine for the decade, there's value in seeing how a zombie film in the 2000s are similar to or different from their predecessors as kind of an intellectual exercise. And of course, the 2000s is when we have this massive boom in popularity and then something of a bust in the late 2000s, at least when it comes to zombie films, big budget studio films, as we will see. So let's do a short history of zombie media. There were zombie movies, I learned, in the 30s and 40s, including one called White Zombie, which sounds super racist, and I Walked with a Zombie, that both take place in the Caribbean. The zombie movie at this point is still attached to that folkloric Haitian tradition. But the real zombie heads know that the major stepping stone, the major breakout film for the zombie film is George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead that came out way back in 1968.
His big revolutionary addition to the zombie lore is that it's a worldwide outbreak. We're no longer dealing with a single zombie on a plantation. right? Now it's like society has collapsed because, you know, the zombies are everywhere. They're globalized.
Its sequel, 1978's Dawn of the Dead, was the highest grossing zombie film of all time, and it spawned the first major wave of zombie films in the 80s. Like, there's one called Day of the Dead. That's George A. Romero's own sequel. There's Return of the Living Dead, which is a campy 1980s zombie comedy. That's the one that gives us zombies saying brains.
Their skin is so gray in those. I was watching a few last night. My God.
They're not that scary. There's not a lot of like flesh rotting off or what have you. They're just gray painted normies that shamble at you. The Italians even get in on this 1980s zombie craze, but because they're Italians, they get on it late. In 1994, there's a surrealist zombie film called Della Morte dell'Amore, On Death, On Love, a nice little Italian pun.
They still don't believe in eating brains and dairy together.
Yeah. And the other big George A. Romero innovation is using the zombie film for some admittedly pretty ham-fisted social commentary. Night of the Living Dead is about racism. Dawn of the Dead is about consumerism. Day of the Dead is about militarism. Our second big wave of zombie films happens in the 2000s. And low-key, it is a product of both globalization and a kind of cultural product singularity. So in the late 90s, the Resident Evil games come out in Japan, originally called like Biohazard in Japanese, and they totally pop off, which in turn leads to a zombie boom in these lower-budget Hong Kong and Japanese film studios, and then Western directors follow suit in turn. And so the major pillars of the zombie boom in the 2000s are going to be the two films that we're talking about today, 28 Days Later by director Danny Boyle and written by Alex Garland, a couple guys who are still around making movies.
Oh yeah, Alex Garland's like one of the foremost, writers of the last 10 years. Incredible that he was working on something that long ago.
Yeah. And then Dawn of the Dead from 2004, a remake directed by none other than Zack Snyder in his directorial debut.
Friend of the pod.
And written by James Gunn. So the once and future kings of the DC extended universe made Dawn of the Dead.
This is all to say, that I think we're trying to contextualize, like, zombie movies have always been a form of, like, fictional storytelling, since the 30s. But what makes them sort of special in the 2000s is that it becomes popular in Asia, or at least is kept going in Asia after its, like, B-movie era in the 80s, and is revitalized with 28 Days Later with some new mechanics that we still kind of live in this world. Like, zombies only kind of became cringe in 2015 or something, like, probably a little earlier, but like, this became a massively popular subgenre in this decade, so much so that it's completely played out. We're living in like the post-zombies world now, where we look back at our pre-zombie world and we're like, wow, I can't believe how fucking nuts we got for all these things.
We're in the post-apocalypse, is what we're saying.
Yeah.
There are some other ones, like on the Patreon feed, you can listen to us talk about Shaun of the Dead, probably in about a week. That's the zombie comedy parody, as well as Zombieland that comes out in 2009. Ever hear about this comic book called The Walking Dead? That starts in 2003, right after 28 Days Later.
Just to prove our point of how popular this zombie fiction became throughout the 2000s, The Walking Dead, the season 5 premiere in 2014, broke the record for the most watched cable telecast ever at the time. 17.3 million viewers on cable.
Goddamn.
Holy shit. This is a TV show about zombies, with like all the body horror and all that, putting up fucking like Dallas numbers or like The Sopranos numbers. Incredible how mainstream this type of fiction became.
Yeah.
And it's all due to this decade and the movies we're going to talk about today, mostly 28 Days Later.
Yep. And this is just a little snapshot. I don't want to just list films at you because that would be pretty boring, but over the course of the decade, there's no less than 6 Resident Evil films. George A. Romero returns to the well. He makes 3 more zombie films 20 or so years after Day of the Dead. I'll give you just a couple snapshots. George A. Romero did one called Land of the Dead, which was a ham-fisted Iraq war satire where they fire off fireworks to distract the zombies through shock and awe. Do you get it? He had one called Diary of the Dead, which is a found footage film. That's Romero's meditation on technology and the internet, and it features a deus ex machina Amish guy who's not susceptible to technology and the internet. There's a far inferior sequel to 28 Days Later called 28 Weeks Later in 2007. We're not going to dig down into it. I will just say the most interesting thing to say about it is that it is a critique of American involvement in Iraq, where the outbreak is over because the zombies have starved to death. The Americans are occupying Britain as they resettle it, and it all goes to hell in the handbasket. And in these secure, safe zones, the American military just starts gunning down and bombing civilians indiscriminately. But by the 2010s, the financial success of the big budget zombie film peters out. It continues to thrive on the premium cable channel AMC through The Walking Dead, and they still keep producing independent or lower budget or foreign movie zombie films. So Warm Bodies 2013, The Dead Don't Die 2019. These are zombie romance and absurdist zombie comedy respectively. Little Monsters 2019, that's about a children's entertainment personality in a zombie outbreak. And of course, the excellent Train to Busan from South Korea.
So sick.
That movie fucking rocks. So there's your short history of zombie media, but what is a zombie, Giordano?
I just want to note on like the Korean sort of renaissance recently that I was going to say like, oh, it's interesting that like it has this sort of global appeal as a folkloric figure. But of course, even the American interpretation of the zombie is like itself already an exported folkloric tale. It's already become globalized when Americans are doing it because it's from first Africa and then the Caribbean and then here. But then Italy, Korea, Israel, as we'll see.
Shout out to Reddit user Gerard Menfin on an Ask Historians thread. He had a comment summarizing the scholarship on the Haitian zombie. So a zombie is a reanimated corpse, almost always cannibalistic, that can spread its infection like a disease through biting. It originally comes from the Haitian folklore and the voodoo tradition. And in Haitian folklore, the zombie is reanimated after death into a mindless servant by a sorcerer. And so in 1975, this Haitian-born scholar, Maximilien Laroche, argued that, and I'm quoting here, the character of the zombie is an adaptation to the Haitian context of the African belief in death. He is the symbol of the slave, the alienated being dispossessed of his will, reduced to slavery, obliged to work for a master. This explains its dual religious and economic significance. You become a zombie when a spell is cast on you, as a result of practices involving the possession of a supernatural power by the spellcaster. But you also become a zombie for the very natural purpose pursued by the spellcaster, to serve a master, to work his field. In short, to provide cheap labor. The persistence of belief in the zombie in Haiti can only be explained by the dual function of voodoo, which is to adapt African belief to the Haitian situation for political purposes that are both defensive and offensive. The African character and the Haitian character are symbols of two types of reality. In this case, a metaphysical, religious reality. In the second, a social, political reality. So what's this mean? What it means is that, as I read it, the zombie is a manifestation of the feelings and fears about chattel slavery. Right? It is the fear that there is no freedom and liberation to be had, even in death. Even in death, you will continue to be a mindless slave, enslaved person, servant. You continue to be a tool for capital.
That's such a more profound understanding of the zombie as a sociological fear than like its modern interpretation. I mean, the point of view is completely flipped, for one, right? You are the zombie and that's the fear, which I think there's a bit of that in our interpretation, but it's mostly about the opposite point of view, which is like what happens to the zombie folkloric figure is like, yeah, at first it's about, oh, what if I was owned even after death and was forced to work? And then it quickly becomes like, from the plantation owner's point of view of like, what if all of these bodies I was surrounded by tried to break into my house and kill me?
Yep, perfect American flipping of the script, where it is now from the perspective of capital. What if the slaves rose up? What if I had to kill my friends and family?
I find that original interpretation from African folklore tradition is so much more profound and like haunting.
And yeah, wouldn't you know it, in terms of the connection to empire and whatnot, the folklore of the zombie is imported to America thanks to, surprise, surprise, the American occupation of Haiti in the early 20th century. That's how the zombie got exported worldwide. Okay, so zombies in the 2000s, broad strokes.
Yeah, just to sort of get us to where we are, kind of what we end up happening here is a few movies from the 30s where it's like set in the Caribbean, you know, and it involves like a monster in the house, you know, and then we get our George Romero revolution of like societal collapse. I mean, there's a lot of like social commentary you can do with that, and then that's where we get to our lull, and now we've arrived at zombies in the 2000s.
Yeah.
With 28 Days Later.
Yes.
Holy shit, is this movie ever good?
Yeah,
God damn.
Fucking rocks.
Okay, the real revolution in zombie filmmaking with 28 Days Later is that the zombies are now fast. They run at you. They're no longer the like brains, you know, arms up, doing the fencing posture after you get a concussion, you know, like they are running at you. They are far more scary.
Yes, they are no longer driven by mindless hunger, but rather a mindless rage. Quite literally, they are infected with the rage virus. Sort of a Limp Bizkit style take on the zombie.
It is just, in fact, one of those days when Cillian Murphy wakes up from his coma.
And everything is fucked. And everybody sucks. Yeah. Everybody sucks your brains out of your cranium.
True, that like the emotional state that you're paranoid about has gone from mindless hunger to mindless rage. Pretty appropriate for the turn of the millennium.
Yep. We also cranked that gore knob up to 11. All the films, including 28 Days Later, are loudly and proudly R-rated, which is not unreasonable or unheard of for a horror flick. But in the capitalist world of movie making, R-rated films tend to have lower ROIs than films with lower ratings because more people can go to see PG-13 and lower ratings. But I think the other major innovation that 28 Days Later has for us is that zombies and zombie films are something to be taken seriously. They are trying to avoid that hokey B-movie quality. That movie that I mentioned, the unauthorized sequel to Night of the Living Dead called Return of the Living Dead, which is an unauthorized sequel because George A. Romero's co-author on the OG Night of the Living Dead retained his rights to all future projects with Living Dead in the title, decided to make it campy and corny, and these movies are trying to be serious. It is not a zombie comedy.
Is it something of a gritty reboot then?
I would say so, yes.
Even the nature of like the undeadness is kind of more realistic. Like it's a straight up medical infection rather than like undead.
Yep. I would also add that in the two films we're reviewing today, nobody says the word zombie. They call them infected. I think Dawn of the Dead just avoids naming them at all. They'll call them like those things or whatever, because there is an implicit recognition that zombie equals corny. And we avoid that because this is serious now.
Of course.
So 28 Days Later, let's quickly power through our characters real quick. We got Jim, Cillian Murphy, a bicycle courier. Until the third act, he is an audience stand-in everyman. In the final act, he is Rambo. He is John Wick. And when it comes to the apocalypse, he's the guy who's hopeful or a little bit idealistic. He's willing to help strangers. He has hope for some kind of future. His foil and love interest is Selena, played by Naomi Harris. She was a chemist before the apocalypse. She's kind of black-pilled and cynical. Survival is all there is to hope for. She's way more mercenary and less sentimental than everyone else. And she undergoes an arc about learning to hope. Then we got Frank, played by Brendan Gleeson. He's also hopeful. He's very much a keep calm and carry on style British guy. He wants to hide the most brutal horrors of the zombie apocalypse from his daughter. He wants to keep up social mores in these new circumstances. And of course we have Hannah, who is Frank's daughter. She's a daughter. Those are all the characters, basically. So our plot summary for 28 Days Later, if you haven't seen it in a while, we open and a PETA-coded eco-terrorism group break into a research lab.
These damn eco-terrorists, they go too far with their activism.
Yes, exactly. Pre-9/11, people were really talking a lot about eco-terrorism as an existential threat. They were burning down ski resort construction sites. You know, it was scary times. They break into the lab, and the lab seems to be subjecting the chimps to the Clockwork Orange torture, where they're forcing them to watch the news. And the scientist says, to cure, you must first understand. And they're developing something called the rage virus. And very predictably, the eco-terrorists let out the chimps. Lady gets bit. She's patient zero. And we have an insta-turn now. Along with being fast, there's no lingering infection that you can hide for your survival gang. You are infected, you are filled with mindless rage, you bite, you vomit up blood, and you spread the infection.
We already have a cure for rage. It's called weed, man.
Cillian Murphy wakes up naked in the hospital, locked in his room with an IV drip in him, and the place is completely abandoned. And there are these beautiful shots around a abandoned London that are incredible, especially considering this was a lower budget film.
Just a quick note on that. Danny Boyle mentioned that they got these shots by just doing it incredibly early in the morning. They could get about 2 minutes of footage before drivers would be too pissed off at them and like drive through the scene. But like sort of getting this in 2-minute increments. He mentioned that he just kind of like got a bunch of like attractive young ladies to be production assistants, and then they would hold up traffic. And he's like, yeah, if you got some pretty girls, like you could hold up traffic for about 2 minutes before people would freak out on you. But if you look closely in some of those like scenes of empty London, you'll see like one guy walking down the street. I guess this is sort of like the one guy who is immune to the production assistants.
That could never happen in New York, because New Yorkers are on that grind, baby. All right. The British lack grind set, okay?
Yeah, also very polite. You know, it's probably like, all right then, you know. But yeah, they did a little guerrilla filmmaking to get these shots.
Hell yeah, that rocks. So eventually, while running away from some infected, Jim falls into the arms of some firebomb throwing, gas mask clad survivors, one of whom is Selena. And these guys blow up an entire gas station with improvised explosive devices to get away from the zombies. And the visuals are very terrorism coded, whether it's global war on terror or IRA stuff. That's just like what they look like. So he meets up with Mark and Selena. They catch him up on how things are going in their little hideout. They say there is no government, there's no police, there's no army, there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no electricity. Jim goes to try and find his family, and it's very tragic. They are indeed dead via suicide. They're holding his photo, and on the back of the photo or attached to a note, it says, "With deepest love, we left you sleeping. Now we're sleeping with you. Don't wake up." A total just lack of hope in this world. There's a jump scare zombie attack as Jim is reminiscing in the kitchen, and Selena comes out with a machete, handles the infected, but Mark, the other guy, got bit, and Selena immediately murders him with the machete. And there's that zombie movie trope of Mark recognizing that he's been bit. He says, wait, don't. Bam. Murders him. Cold blood. This is the kind of world that we're in. I like these scenes because it establishes a lot very quickly in terms of world building without using clunky dialogue for the most part. Jim and Selena see some Christmas lights on the balcony of a tower block, and they go to investigate. There's another infected chase. But eventually we meet Frank, Brendan Gleeson.
I like that use of like the Christmas lights just as like a sign of humanity, right? Something superfluous and like related to a tradition that like might give you some sense that there's other humanity out there.
Yep. Frank's big guy, gas mask, trench coat, riot gear, pretty badass. He seems nice. And at this point, our heroes hear a broadcast from some soldiers saying on repeat, "Salvation is here," telling folks to go to a roadblock north of Manchester.
And I don't know about you, but as soon as you hear the word salvation, you're on edge a little bit. You're like, uh-oh. That word has such a like religious connotation typically of zealotry, right? That you start to get a little worried.
Yep. So they start their road trip in Frank's iconic black London cab. And throughout this part of the film, there's some tension between our survivors, where because Selena is all about staying light and limber, no connections, full-on individualism, total skepticism about everything. She thinks the soldiers might be dead. She thinks this is a bad idea. Resignation, no hope, rely on yourself, all that. She doesn't want to team up with an old guy and his daughter. But pretty much every other character sees some kind of community as the way forward. Relying on each other, supporting one another, hope, faith, whether that's in the soldiers' broadcast or in family.
This is the biggest theme of the movie, and the one I think that hits best is the theme of community and like how you view others, right? And Selena has, like you said, that very Wild West individualistic outlook, and we'll see her arc over the course of the movie change.
Yeah. What do we do in a time of total crisis? Do we rely on ourselves or do we rely on others? And in this middle act of the movie, there are some moments of joy and levity as they go on their little road trip. There's one scary scene where they're going through a tunnel and it almost goes south, but doesn't. And once they're out of South London and they're on the more ritzy side of the Thames, they go on a little shopping trip. And every post-apocalyptic movie worth its salt needs to have a montage scene. It is as required as a fighting movie training montage scene. You need to have some montage scene where you enjoy the fruits of capitalism without the artificial scarcity or market pressures. So there's this great scene where when they're in the nice grocery store, They're not relying on gas stations like they were on the south side of the Thames in their food deserts. They get the good shit, right? They go to pick up booze, and Frank says, no, we get the top shelf stuff. And he's like reading the pretentious descriptions of scotch. You know, they can get canned fruit for the first time. And Selena says, like, oh, I can taste the vitamins. Because, you know, they were just eating Doritos and Pepsi until now, or whatever the British have instead of Doritos. And yeah, there's nice little picnicking scenes. We see that nature is healing. The horses are wild again. There's some fun meditation on the apocalypse, where Selena says, you'll never read something that hasn't been written yet. You'll never hear a song that hasn't been recorded already. And Selena has this recognition that all this death doesn't mean anything to Frank and Hannah because they have family. Maybe there's more to life than just staying alive. You know, she plants a little peck of a kiss on Jim.
Yeah, she talks about roles, right? Mm-hmm. Like how those roles for them have stayed consistent pre and post apocalypse.
Yep.
Father, daughter.
And even like when Jim has a nightmare, because he takes a bunch of Valium to be able to sleep, his nightmare isn't about zombies. It's not about being eaten. His nightmare is about being left alone. It's about being abandoned. They make it to the checkpoint. There's nothing to find. There's no soldiers there. And Frank's faith is shattered. This guy who is his kindly old father says, go fucking where? He has this moment of doubt. And there's this heartbreaking scene where there's a crow or a raven pecking away at a corpse, and Brendan Gleeson's trying to shoo it away, and he looks up, and a singular drop of blood drops right into his eye, infecting him.
Tough stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Really hard scene for you to watch, where you're just like, oh no, Frank, the nice guy who, like, you know, after this giant road trip, he gives into his frustration by yelling at this crow. Like, yelling at the crow accomplishes nothing,
mm-hmm.
right? It's just like an outlet for like frustration, and he just like allows himself to be like a little bit angry at the world, and poetically is like immediately rewarded with being infected in front of his daughter.
Yeah. And because he knows he only has minutes, he tries to make amends. He says, sorry, I lost my temper. I love you very much, right before he turns. Jim goes to kill him with a bat in front of his daughter. He's winding up for the swing. And then right there, the camouflage soldiers come in with gas masks and shoot him dead. Frank is gone. So we're into the third and final act of the movie. You could immediately tell something is up with these soldiers when they get to their fortified army base, because two of the guys are, you know, checking out the women and they're kind of smirking.
I think there's no women there is like the biggest alarm bells that are going off
mm-hmm.
too. You're like, what the hell?
Yeah. The commander, he's talking about rebuilding civilization. They have an infected that they keep chained in the back. And you know this is like a Chekhov's gun. Like as soon as it's shown to you, the viewer, it's like, yeah, you know this chained up zombie is coming back in some way. There's this ice cold line where the commander says, he's telling me he'll never make bread, raise crops. He's telling me he's futureless. And eventually he'll tell me how long the infected take to starve. There's a dinner scene, there's little spiels about civilization, where the commander just sees continuity between the time before the infection and the time after. This is nothing different, it's just people killing people. And one soldier who's a New Age guru type, he sees the infection wiping out humanity as a kind of return to normalcy for the planet. You know, nature is healing. Maybe this is the planet correcting itself. Also kind of tropey. There's always some character in the zombie movie who says, we deserve this and we had it coming for some reason or another. There is an attack on the secure compound. The army handles it super well. Mines, tripwires, big machine guns, floodlights, some really well filmed action and practical effects. And right after the soldiers are keyed up from battle, they start sexually harassing and groping Selena when they're all keyed up. And there's a very dark but completely foreseeable reveal. Commander Eccleston, I forget the character's name. He's played by Christopher Eccleston, Doctor Who himself. He said he promised the men women because women mean a future. They try and make a run for it. Jim takes a gun butt to the face. The one soldier with the conscience, the New Age sergeant, tries to pull a gun to prevent basically gang rape in the moment and is promptly subdued by the other soldiers. Jim and the sergeant, they're chained to radiators. They're about to be killed. And the sergeant is trying to say he thinks Britain got quarantined. He thinks there's pockets of the world that aren't infected. So what the commander is doing is insane. trying to abduct people and use them as sex slaves, basically.
Right. This is the big like perspective shift in the last act, is you learn that this soldier society are the real villains here. They're trying to build a society in which like they have a future because they have women, but of course like they don't mean that in the traditional sense that the like women can have children and we can build families or whatever. They just mean it in the sense that like we'll have a future because we have sex slaves. Incredibly like morbid ideology that they have here, that they can somehow like create this synthetic society in which half of its members or whatever are subjugated sex slaves.
Yeah, a society where might makes right. Jim gets away from his execution by hiding in a pile of corpses while the idiot soldiers argue with one another over the best method to kill the new sergeant. Should we shoot him? Should we bayonet him? And Jim gets away. And Jim gets over the wall, no gun, no vehicle, hands tied, zombies everywhere. Things are not looking good. But what does he see in the sky? He sees a plane. The planes are still flying. There's still some civilization out there. And so it's at this point that Jim goes full Rambo. He lures some soldiers out of the compound using an air raid siren. He's sneaking around. He's picking them off one by one. He's sabotaging vehicles. He's luring infected to attack them. Then he goes back to the base, unleashes their pet infected, and the soldiers gradually get picked off one by one. They're turning infected themselves. Jim stabs a guy himself, gets his hands dirty with the knife bayonet.
Yeah, I love his strategic decision here. They have a very well reinforced base. And so his strategic decision is to like let an infected loose in the base to destabilize them. And then from there, he can kind of operate. Because at first you're like, oh, well, the infected is just as likely to kill Selena. But it creates a bunch of chaos in this situation, and he can take advantage of that chaos.
Some very satisfying zombie kills, big you got what you had coming to you energy, and Jim becomes something of a monster himself. He bludgeons a guy to death against a brick wall and gouges out his eyes. And Selena, she's got the machete ready to go kill him. Very sweet moment where earlier in the film she said she would kill him in a heartbeat, but she hesitates. And Cillian Murphy says, that was longer than a heartbeat. And even in this dark, dark film, after they start smooching, Hannah smashes like a vase or something on his head because she thought he was biting her. But they were just kissing. You know, we can still have fun in the apocalypse. We can still have jokes. Jim gets shot on the way out. But we cut to 28 days later than that. Jim pulls through, probably thanks to Selena's pharmacist training, and we see them somewhere in a cabin in rural England. They're sewing something, which is the true apocalypse skill training. Making and repairing clothes and fabric is how you should train for the apocalypse, not by hoarding guns and beans. It is a valuable skill that we should all have. And we see shots of these emaciated infected that are starting to starve to death. And they use their sewing skills to make giant banners that say hello and things of that nature. And we see the plane fly over, and the final line of the film is, "You think he saw us this time?" And then we get roll credits. Hope wins. Hope wins in the end.
Really good stuff.
Yeah. So we're going to go, before we do our themes, we're going to go right into film number 2, Dawn of the Dead, the 2004 remake.
Yeah, just so we can talk about our themes and tropes together.
But I guess the last thing I'll say on 28 Days Later, 28 Days Later rocks. It's the superior of these two films.
Yeah, if you're going to watch any zombie movie, I think this is it.
Yeah.
You know?
Okay, Dawn of the Dead. Dawn of the Dead's characters. It doesn't have characters. It has tropes. Unlike the stacked cast of Cillian Murphy, Naomi Harris, and Brendan Gleeson, we have Ving Rhames and then a bunch of TV actors.
True. Then no one really had the career of a Cillian Murphy or Brendan Gleeson after this.
No. So Ving Rhames plays Sergeant Kenneth Hall. Wouldn't you know, he's a tough-as-nails, no-nonsense cop. There's a guy named Michael who's the reluctant leader and former TV salesman at Best Buy. Looked up his filmography. He's a big Law & Order, NCIS-style guy.
Oh, wait. I have to eat my words on this next character, actually. You got Steve, played by Ty Burrell. I said no one broke out from this movie. How could I forget about Ty Burrell?
I mean, he's a TV actor. Not to be too much of a snob about this, but...
And it's not like he was on The Sopranos or something. He was on Modern Family.
Yeah.
He plays Phil Dunphy. Yeah.
He plays the douchebag asshole. There's a character named CJ, played by an actor named Michael Kelly. He's a tyrannical mall cop. His big roles include House of Cards, the Amazon Jack Ryan, and he was an FBI agent on Sopranos, Giordano.
But never really in a starring role. He's always sort of like the helping hand to someone.
Yeah. Then there's Anna, who is the blonde girl Pearl, the lead actress of the film, and some even more minor characters that I just have in my notes as Eye Candy number 1, Eye Candy number 2, Gun Psycho Survivalist, Father and Daughter.
Characters not really as well fleshed out as 28 Days Later.
No. And yeah, this is a film that's like, even though it's not a B movie in terms of its like budget or what have you, it has a lot of those B movie tropes. So, plot summary for this film. Our main character is a nurse. She's at the hospital. We see the telltale signs that the zombie apocalypse has started when we're in the hospital, but our main character and her man miss the special news bulletin to have shower sex. Our first on-screen zombie is the neighborhood kid, a roller skating child. Great gore reveal, like rotted away lips. Kid bites the man on the neck, and like 28 Days Later, these are your fast sprint runny zombies, and they also turn pretty quickly, at least at this part of the film. In other parts of the film, not. They're not very consistent. There are many subgenres of the subgenre of zombie film. You got zombie comedy, zombie action, zombie horror, and this film is loudly and proudly in the zombie horror camp, even down to Zombie Louis breaking through the bathroom door like The Shining, or the little neighborhood girl in white kind of recalling The Ring. There's these little visual flourishes that try and tell you like, hey, this is scary shit. This is a horror movie. Main character, heroine Anna, the nurse, drives out of her suburban neighborhood, crashes her car, and meets Ving Rhames as cop. They meet up with some more armed survivors, a pregnant lady. I just wrote in my notes, pregnant lady, white guy, black guy. And they say, we're going to the mall. And I just asked myself, like, why? But why, though?
It's the third space.
There's some zombie encounters at the mall, and when they get there, the pregnant lady gets almost bit, is in fact bit, but hiding it. Couple encounters, mostly easily dispatched. And our heroes discover that the second floor of the mall has been taken over by some fucking up-jumped mall cops on a power trip.
Yeah, I love these mall cops in the post-apocalyptic society. That they like still wear their uniforms, you know? They're so still connected to the world pre-apocalypse, you know?
It's like that saying, like, in the world of the blind, the one-eyed man is king. It's like in the world of
anarchy or whatever,
the mall
like post-apocalyptic anarchy, the mall cop is king.
Yeah. And so for this first little bit in the mall, the original gang of survivors are basically prisoner hostages of the mall cops. And of course, at this time, we have this drop lifted basically verbatim from the 1970s original. They're looking at a horde of zombies outside the mall, and they say, why are they coming here? Memory, maybe? Instinct? All we do is shop. All we do is consume. My brother in Christ, you went to the mall. After overthrowing the mall cop imperium,
specifically over an argument about whether or not to accept other refugees, right? Basically,
yes.
The mall cops at first believe that they're in like a fortress on that second floor. You know, we can't accept anyone in. But in one of the lower level mall cops, in their tiny hierarchy that they have, he wants to accept these refugees, and so there's a disagreement, and they're able to then lock up the mall cops.
Yeah, there's a big debate over whether or not to accept these guys, but they eventually do, including some people who are very obviously bitten. This is where Ty Burrell's asshole character comes in. One of the new survivors, a rotund old lady, she dies. People are sad. She immediately awakens and gets a fire poker through the eye from our nurse. Just a little bit of the body horror that we get. At this point, the nurse finally realizes the very obvious thing about the bites, that the bites turn you, which is crazy because she witnessed her man get killed and bitten and reanimated. But it takes a long time for our idiot characters to realize the mechanics of the zombie apocalypse. There's, a zombie trope. What do we do with the bitten? Because there are other people who are bitten. Do we lock them up? Do we kill them on the spot?
Classic zombie movie trope of someone who, like, that soon they're going to be the monster trying to kill you. So it's like, well, what do we do until then? Do I just kill you now? Do I wait? Do I give you as much time as possible?
Yeah, there's like a tearful goodbye between father and daughter when the father realizes he's going to be killed, but they do the right thing and they wait for him to die in turn before eventually blowing his head off. And of course, we get our montage. We need a montage of all of our guys, once again, just indulging in hedonism and consumerism.
They're always playing fucking golf, too, I notice, in these, like, capitalism montages. The fantasy of playing golf in the urban center is very strong. And the I Am Legend does it as well. But yeah, they play the Down with the Sickness, the Lounge Singer cover, which obviously dog shit song. But, like, I think it really fits well in a scene about, like, indulging in the surplus success of this capitalist society that no longer has property rights.
Yep. It's consumerism and it's hedonism. There's shots of fucking too. There's shots of making a sex tape in the apocalypse. That Richard Cheese lounge cover of songs that shouldn't be lounge covers is so good. Perfect for this. We also start to see our heroes start to enjoy violence for the sake of violence, where across the street from the mall is the gun shop owner who's a survivalist with 1,000,000 guns. And they're playing a game of Guess Who, where they'll write the name of an actor like Rosie O'Donnell or Burt Reynolds, and this guy with a sniper rifle needs to find him in the crowd and blow the zombie's head off, where they are indulging some of their more base violent urges. Maybe we're the monsters, Giordano. Have you ever thought about that? It's pretty deep.
Yeah, they're killing for sport at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes quite literally as sport, where they're like hitting the golf balls into the zombie horde.
Yep. The pregnant lady dies from her infected arm bite, and the husband has her tied up and kept away from the rest of the group, trying to hide it from everybody. He's obsessed with protecting his family. And very weird, dark body horror scene where this zombie woman gives birth. And you are thinking, like, is this thing a zombie or not? There's a zombie baby, folks. This is something that Zack Snyder added to the original Dawn of the Dead. After the zombie comes out of the pregnant lady, with this body horror shock value that you see coming 1,000,000 miles away, this other old lady comes in with a gun, and there's a kind of funny scene because it's, of course, Zack Snyder slow motion of the father and the old lady shooting each other and dying as he holds the zombie baby. And the other survivors come in and discover the macabre scene, and we see Anna the nurse shoot a zombie baby in the head.
It made me think a little bit of 28 Days Later, that father, or like the soon-to-be father, can only really think of himself in that role. And then when that's taken away from him, he goes crazy.
Yep.
He basically has a break with reality and starts to kill the other survivors.
So in the last act of the movie, your survivors come up with a plan, which is to reinforce some of the parking buses from the parking garage and drive to the marina to take Ty Burrell's boat and drive to an island in the Great Lakes where there are very few people. And there's a weird meta line where the deposed mall cop summarizes the absurdity of the plan sarcastically. You're telling me we're going to do this? And describes it ridiculously. And then he goes, I'm in, with the meta wink. So they reinforce the buses, they gather up their ammo. They want to save the survivalist gun nut across the street, but he's starting to get hungry. He's not in a mall. His shop is just filled with ammo. He would be a useful part of the crew. So they decide to use Chips the dog, because they have figured that zombies don't like dog flesh, to bring over a walkie-talkie and some food. And the plan immediately goes wrong. The zombies get in through the doggy door, and there's this very dark, tragic moment where the survivalist gets bitten and he's talking to them over the walkie, and the survivalist doesn't realize he's about to die in turn, and nobody on the roof of the mall has the heart to tell him that he's going to die and that they can't save him and that they can't bring him with them.
They might have wanted to write on the sign before sending the dog over, don't get bit, put on gloves or something.
Be aware.
Yeah.
One of the new survivors, eye candy number 2, Nicole, the dog lover, she starts driving the moving truck across the street to save the fucking dog. And so Andy's already a zombie. We listen to Nicole lock herself in a closet, and the crew goes on a very questionable suicide mission to rescue Nicole, Chips, or Andy, who's obviously already dead and zombified, and stock up ammo. They find and kill zombified Andy. Nicole is somehow still alive. There's a bunch of action as they fight their way back to the mall through the sewers, and the crew decides they gotta leave abruptly because the mall is no longer secure through their fortified buses. The reinforced buses, they leave. They look pretty cool. They're covered in spikes and barbed wire, and they got the cattle thing that goes on trains back in the day.
They got the slits on the side for running a chainsaw across the outside.
Yeah, it's very, very over the top. We get some more action, we get some IED propane tanks, cool explosions, slow motion, of course. There's an accidental chainsaw death in the bus where they hit a bump and an old guy, Looney Tunes, falls with a chainsaw into one of the people. Ty Burrell gets zombie killed when his bus capsized, and Anna the nurse shoots him in the head, calling back to one of the lines said earlier in the movie, where Ty Burrell, the asshole, said, if I ever turn into one of those things, shoot me in the head. And Anna said, don't worry, I will. And then she does. She grabs the boat key from Ty Burrell's corpse. CJ, the mall cop, at the marina, blows himself up in the reinforced van, sacrificing himself for the others to buy some time. Michael, the leader, has been bitten. He stays on the dock, shoots himself in the head as the horde of zombies watch, and they sail off into the sunset to the drop of the song People Who Died, which is a perfect song drop. But wouldn't you know it, we get a post-credit sequence of sorts, where first we just see some shots of titties, and I'm like, okay, Zack Snyder, sure. But it's revealed that it is Ty Burrell's camcorder on the boat, and our survivors start filming on this camera. And then we get a little found footage post-credit sequence where we see our survivors slowly run out of water, we see them run out of food, and all the maggots are eating it, we see them run out of fuel, we see them deal with a fire, they make it to an island. We hear someone say, it doesn't look like anyone's there, but the final reveal is that zombies are on the island. A horde, gunshots, camera drops, so everyone actually dies. The end. And then they drop the original Down with the Sickness song. Oh, wah! Oh, I can't do it. Oh, wah! I can't do it. Shit. Oh, wah!
Yeah.
The end. Everyone died. The whole film was for nothing.
Oh no, man! I did not see that post-credits scene when I watched the movie. That's too bad.
Oh, you turned it off?
Yeah, I was like, all right, fine, you got this done. Check.
So there are your two plot summaries. Let's talk themes and big ideas. So the first theme that I have is hope versus despair / individualism versus communitarianism. Like Jordan already said, this is the main theme of 28 Days Later.
Yeah, and it's a main theme in like most zombie movies because like the social order has been upended. You know, we have like a social order in which we coordinate based on family, but mostly like due to capitalism, right? That's our like primary form of coordination right now. But now we're just like in a state of like anarchy, post-apocalypse. And so there's like choices that our heroes have, which is like, am I going to be like Selena and be the Lone Ranger, the cowboy? Any amount of sympathy or empathy I show anyone else in this world is just a weakness and going to come back to harm me? Or do I coordinate with others? This is like the primary like moral question that I think heroes are always put in these situations is like, do I help others and potentially risk dying myself as a result of this compassion? Which is one of the reasons why I have a hard time with them sometimes. It's like, it's such a nihilistic world that they live in, where like any amount of compassion is almost like a vulnerability for you.
Yeah, Selena says this explicitly in the film. Have you got any plans, Jim? Do you want us to find a cure and save the world, or just fall in love and fuck? Plans are pointless. Staying alive is as good as it gets. She's joking about the absurdity of a happily ever after.
I love it when characters state their worldview. It makes it much easier to do a podcast.
It's interesting to see as she witnesses Frank and Hannah and she starts to like open herself up to caring, we see this hard, cold British exterior start to melt a little bit. Where there's a point where she starts crying and Jim responds, "Stop that," which is a very British reaction. But once she has opened herself up to caring, she has opened herself up to feeling sad and bad.
Stiffen up that upper lip.
Yep. And even like Jim himself is faced with this moral dilemma. Once he escapes the soldiers, he could choose to just go out on his own. But he chooses to go back and go full Rambo to save the two women from the soldiers.
And I love this talk of roles in 28 Days Later, right? She says they have a role in this world. Like, this is kind of the thing that she's amazed by and like finding herself sort of interested in. She's like, look at this very natural human relationship that gives them a sense of identity and purpose, father and daughter, right? And so like she's kind of seeing Jim and is like, well, maybe, you know, maybe there's partner roles here for me. And I love that when they get into this like military compound, the roles that they're setting out for themselves in this new world is just like of subjugator and subjugatee, basically. Those are the roles that they see. That's their vision of the future. Right. And these are completely unnatural roles, right? I love that contrast between our heroes' roles that they see for themselves and this alternative worldview. Because like they're not explicitly made to be villains at first, right? This like military camp. The leader of the military people like goes to Jim and tries to reason with him and be like, I need to give these men some hope. But it's all predicated on sexual subjugation. What kind of society is this? What kind of community is this?
It's not a community. It's Exploitation and hierarchy, yeah.
Exploitation by military violence.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, the film comes down very firmly on the side of hope and community over despair in the individual, right? I already said the final line is, "You think they saw us," with the plane flying over, right? Their faith is rewarded as they all work together in their comfy sweater cabin, sewing the banners to attract the remnants of civilization. They don't succumb to despair like the soldiers to try and make their sex slavery compound. They relied on each other and in hope in other people, and they win in the end.
Yeah, and I think this is really like what you get when you have someone like Alex Garland writing a zombie movie. I mean, this guy has written so many brilliant movies, right? Like Ex Machina. We liked Warfare. We've talked about that on this show before.
Mm-hmm.
I think in general, he tends to write movies that are like very thoughtful about a theme, and they'll just like go a lot farther than something offered by James Gunn, or even like 28 Weeks Later,
yeah,
you know, which lost Garland.
And we see the broad contours of this theme in even Dawn of the Dead, where Ving Rhames starts out the film mostly caring about himself and trying to find his brother. There's one point in the film where he wants to leave the mall to go look for his brother, and someone says, "There's people here who could use your help." And he responds, "Fuck y'all." He's a tough as nails cop. I don't know if you were aware. But we do see the protagonists start to come together, including the abusive mall cop tyrant becoming a better, more self-sacrificing person. The only person who doesn't change is Ty Burrell, who stays a selfish asshole throughout the entire film.
Yeah, but I think in a way, it's not entirely antisocial, right? Like, there's that scene where he says something like very dark and macabre, like he's being himself, he's being a dick.
Yeah.
But everybody laughs at it. They've found value in him being at least like funny or having some gallows humor in moments like this. Like, it's not as if he's like explicitly against them. And I do think that this is always interesting in zombie movies, where like we've talked about how there's this initial period after a zombie outbreak where like the fruits of our capitalist surplus are available. There's no more property rights. But then like eventually you have to start growing your own food. And I think like the model that we typically see in post-apocalyptic fiction is anarchism, like with 28 Years Later, it's sort of an anarchist commune, or just like a straight up a communist commune. I love that line from The Last of Us where he's like, "Oh, it sounds pretty communist to me." And she's like, "Yeah, we're communists." Like, we needed to find like a new social order, and like good luck getting capitalism spinning with like 100 people or whatever, right? Like, who are you going to subjugate here? Like, who's going to be on the bottom of this when you only have very few people?
I think we might just need to, from each according to his ability, this motherfucker here.
Yeah, that's what I typically find interesting about these zombie movies, is the erasure of the social order and like its resetting, and how people deal with that, and how they can explore if capitalism, like Mark Fisher said, is the only thing that we can imagine. What does like a post-apocalyptic world look like? Yeah,
and I wish more zombie movies were set not in the early stages of the outbreak. I like films that are years into the outbreak, because, yeah, in the early stages, you can just grab all of your guns and you can be a Lone Ranger. You can eat all the chips and beans and shelf-stable goods that you want for a while. But eventually, you hit other problems. Eventually, because they're not making any new stuff, you need to make your own stuff. And what kind of society do we build? I think is like far more interesting question to explore than what do you do when the shit's going down.
And it's funny, like you read about pre-industrial societies or even like pre-farming societies where just having fewer people means that like having insane wealth inequality like just doesn't sit right with people, right? If you're gonna have 100 people, it's much harder to sort of imagine a few people at the top having everything, right? Because it's so much easier for those without wealth to coordinate. And it always makes me think of Peter Thiel has like an island off of somewhere like in New Zealand where he has like a compound, right? That like if we end up in a post-apocalyptic world, there's a zombie outbreak, whatever, he's going to go to this compound and he still has chefs and like security and all of these people working for him in a post-apocalyptic world. And I think I read somewhere, and I'll have to fact check this, but what is Peter Thiel's plan for like reinforcing these roles after the end of the world, right? He's like, they're not going to give a shit that you're their employer at this point. And I think the suggestion he offered was that they wear necklaces that have bombs on them.
Yes. There's an incredible book called Survival of the Richest, Escape Fantasies of the Billionaires. And it's about this cottage industry of different kinds of survivalism for the billionaires to escape the problems that they themselves have created. The reason we are facing a climate catastrophe or what have you, or some kind of social upheaval, is because of the system that produced the billionaires. And I believe the book called it like the billionaire's trap. How do we escape the world that we've created? And there are conferences about, okay, yeah, how do you keep people in line in the compound? The true survivalism is actually coordination. It's knowing your neighbors, learning how to garden, and learning how to sew. Those 3 skills will get you pretty far, I think.
And I think really like the only strict hierarchy that you ever see in these post-apocalyptic worlds are the military hierarchies, right? That's like the one area where hierarchy still exists, whether it be like the mall cops in Dawn of the Dead, who still have a hierarchy, or like the military compound in 28 Days Later.
Actually, this is a great segue because I think we basically wrapped up hope versus despair. I think the only thing I would say is that whatever optimism or hope that we saw in the community in Dawn of the Dead is completely undercut by the fact that everyone dies in the end and the film was for nothing. I truly got beef. I get that it's a horror movie, and sometimes horror movies kill off all their characters. I know Blair Witch Project did that. To me as a viewer, maybe I'm sensitive, maybe I'm a simpleton, I don't like movies where everyone dies. I need at least one person to survive. But let's talk politics. There's kind of just like a hodgepodge potpourri of political takes and observations on these 2 films, because obviously there's no explicit political program or commentary on the political state of affairs because there's no more politics, there's no more government. But I think there's still some interesting things to note. I mean, in Dawn of the Dead, we see that the government is less than useless, which maybe aligns with Zack Snyder's own reactionary politics. But in 28 Days Later, we see that there is still some government out there flying planes and coordinating and doing stuff. There's still pockets of civilization. We gotta have our obligatory Mark Fisher drop, capitalism, blah, 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 no future. There is no alternative. Capitalist realism. We can't even imagine alternative. And one of the reasons that the soldiers in 28 Days Later go so insane is that there is, quote, no future without women. And Commander Doctor Who said he walked in on a soldier with a gun in his mouth, and he promised him women to keep him, hopeful. And it's just funny to me to imagine the inevitable court-martial that would happen, since we've established that the zombies start to starve. So this zombie outbreak only lasts something like 66 weeks, if my math is mathing right, once the zombies start to starve to death. So just imagining this court-martial, you started abducting women to be sex slaves because your soldiers couldn't go 4 weeks without busting? Like, it is truly the incel unit.
It's only been 4 weeks. It's crazy how they're already broken down into the incel unit. Exactly.
Yeah. These guys have never had a dry spell. these fucking soldiers have never had a dry spell. 4 weeks, those are rookie numbers. Another political reading of the zombie film is that all zombie movies feature the implicit, violent power fantasies of being this totally alienated individual who not only can, but also has to kill his neighbors and loved ones. It is the triumph of the individual over something called society. Because there is no more society anymore. So your options are either double down on your individualism or try and build a new society.
It's very interesting how the human being as an organism, I would say like our strongest natural ability is like our ability to coordinate with others, right? We have by far like the most complex language system in like the animal world, all built for coordinating with each other. And yet there's this idolization of like the individual in these societies that you imagine yourself to be stronger without having to deal with the weaknesses of other humans, right? When we all know that the thing that we really have is our coordination ability.
There's some great stuff in the David Graeber Dawn of Everything book, where for most of human history, we were hunter-gatherers, and we were dependent on one another to get our food pre-agriculture. Stone Age tools, right? And we killed all the megafauna. Think about how impressive that is. Ain't no more woolly mammoth. We did that. We brought that tremendous violence through sheer coordination. Imagine taking down a woolly mammoth with nothing but stone tools. I love that book because it pours over the evidence and points out that in some of these Neolithic burial sites, we find people with dwarfism or gigantism or some kind of physical deformity being buried in these very ostentatious burial sites where they have taken ivory and they've carved thousands of individual beads as some kind of offering or gift. And you think like, okay, these people would probably have been a liability in a highly mobile hunter-gatherer society, and yet they appear to have been been buried with enormous respect and honor. So I think there's coordination, and I think, maybe I'm being a little idealistic about it, I think there's also empathy as like one of our strengths. Is like, we are going to care for these people who cannot help in a hunter-gatherer way. We're going to take them with them, we're going to bury them with honors in terms of what it is to be human or what have you. But yeah, something like the Christian conservative Kevin Sorbo movie is about the violent power fantasies of the suburban right-wing killing Antifa. The zombie movie is that, but scaled up to everyone. For a different thinker, Freud wrote a work called Civilization and Its Discontents. It's one of his last works. You probably have a view of Freud where it's like, oh yeah, that's the fucking his mother guy, right? That's like everything we do is tied up with a sexual impulse in some way. And Civilization and Its Discontents is this very bleak book that says it's not just our drive for sex that animates us. It is also our drive for violence. And this thing called civilization is about curbing our natural violent impulse. And the zombie film is taking this like very kind of almost Freudian view that once civilization goes away, those violent impulses can come out again and you can exert your power and will upon others, including the people that used to be your friends and family. Also, again, tangentially related to politics, notice how any American zombie film is going to have guns because of American culture. And not to be too much of a Reddit dork about this, but I feel like the gun is not the ideal weapon for a zombie apocalypse because you need to have headshot accuracy all the time to stop them. Whereas the British films go for the blunt objects and axes thanks to gun control.
Or the cricket bat.
The cricket bat in Shaun of the Dead. What you lose in needing to get close, you gain in easier accuracy, I think. And then my final, slightly shoehorn take about specifically 2000s politics. I'm not saying I believe this, but I was just trying to cook up the takes for the potpourri. Just another take for the sauce. People in the 2000s talked about, quote, radical Islamism like it was some kind of social contagion. You know, the words and the preaching could radicalize or infect the Muslim populations of Western nations. Are the zombies terrorists? Who's to say? I think the major 2000s fear that the zombie film represents is paranoia, right?
Yes.
If we are obsessed with the war on terror, you know, we got the government talking about the code oranges or whatever, like terrorism is the fucking weather. We're obsessed with paranoia and fear.
And specifically fear about someone here and you can't tell, much like a person who's maybe like been bitten, but like hasn't turned into a zombie yet. You know, this guy in your flight school, is he a regular flight enthusiast? Or is he a terrorist? You know, if you see something, say something style paranoia.
Yeah, so if there's any kind of subconscious 2000s fear that the zombie movie represents, it is just the general concept of fear, mistrust, paranoia.
We do get that explicit, I think, mention in 28 Weeks Later, when like the American military shows up as part of a NATO force in England to kill the zombies and just decides like it's actually just easier to kill everyone than it is to just identify who is a zombie and who is a human.
Yeah,
right?
let God sort them out.
Little war on terror metaphor there in 28 Weeks Later.
Let's talk a little bit about class. Every character in 28 Days Later is a member of the working class. Bike messenger, chemist, which I think is British for like pharmacist or pharmacist assistant, taxi cab driver.
Yeah, you quickly get a sense in these zombie movies like who has a real job, right? Ben has a system, by the way, where he's identified that there are 4 types of jobs, right?
Yes.
Teacher, banker, creative, or useful people. And you quickly get a sense that the useful people in this post-apocalyptic world are like, not only are they just as useful, they're actually like more useful than ever.
Significantly
the nurses,
more useful.
And so, yeah, it's always interesting to see anyone who was like a banker or even kind of a creative, I guess, or teacher in this new world. All of those skills are effectively useless. And yet the nurse remains.
Yeah, we see them thrive. We already mentioned, right? Their shopping trip can only happen when they're in the nicer part of London, because when they're in their hometowns, they're in food deserts, relying on gas stations.
Yeah.
I will say that there's a weirdly classist line from Cillian Murphy when they're going towards Frank's house, which is one of these tower blocks of flats or whatever. He's barricaded the entrance with a bunch of shopping carts. And Cillian Murphy's trying to make a lighthearted joke. He says, "What is it with tower blocks and trolleys? Am I right?" It's like those poors can't help themselves from stealing the shopping carts. And yeah, I think the closest that we see to an upper class character is, of course, the evil British officer. The officer class is made up of upper class people who is played by Doctor Who himself, Christopher Eccleston, and I like to imagine it's just one of Doctor Who's darkest adventures. Come with me on this adventure, Rose Tyler. We're going to 2002 zombie apocalypse to do a thing.
Yeah, you might want to change. Yeah, let's just talk a little bit about property and the apocalypse, because I think this is where you get like a lot of the funnier moments in these worlds, right? To just like reimagine the concept of property when there's no one to enforce the rights of it.
Mm-hmm.
So for 28 Days Later, right, like he goes to grab the well scotch instinctually before Brandon Gleeson has to remind him, like, there's no more scarcity. You can just take the best scotch.
And my favorite part of that shopping montage is the end, where as they're coming out with their shopping carts full, he puts his debit card on the counter. There's no one there to take it. He just leaves it there. There's no reason to hang on to this piece of plastic anymore. The fiat currency is as meaningless as the material it is made out of at this point.
Yeah, he's grabbing all the dollar bills when he first leaves the hospital or whatever, too. One of the funniest lines in Dawn of the Dead, I thought, was when the mall cop head is like locking them up for the night, and he's like, I don't want you sneaking around stealing shit. It's like, this guy is still being a mall cop. The idea that they're gonna take a fucking stereo system still annoys him in this post-apocalyptic world.
Turns out mall cop was his calling. It was a vocation for him. Bro, the world has ended. I mean, also interesting, most of the characters in Dawn of the Dead are also of the working class to the extent that we know any of their jobs, right? Ty Burrell's the exception, and he's the asshole.
Right.
And for that one, like related to property, Dawn of the Dead is, of course, about consumerism. The OG Dawn of the Dead was a ham-fisted allegory. The zombies come to the mall because it's what they know, but notice that so too do our heroes. Both of the Dawn of the Deads have the montages of the heroes indulging in the hedonistic pleasure of acquiring things. And what I love about this is that it's not even about the scarcity anymore. It would be one thing if our pleasure centers reacted because it was something we thought we couldn't have, or we thought that it made us better than others in comparison, right? If we thought it was some kind of conspicuous consumption to show off for others. But the film posits that we just like getting stuff. No matter how useless or impractical, there's no showing off. Like, I like the shiny shoes. I like the fancy golf clubs. The utility does not matter. I just like my baubles, even in this like apocalypse, which is pretty bleak. And everyone knows that the consumerism satire has to do with the zombies, but also both films have to do with the heroes maybe indulging in their consumerist fantasies a little bit too much, because rather than come up with a plan or try to escape or further fortify the mall or like plan to conserve their resources because eventually the Auntie Anne's is going to run out of pretzels, they just have fun and consume. And it is part of what leads to all of their death, at least an aspect of it.
Yeah, if they had spent like a little bit less time hitting golf balls and fucking, they might have been able to do the escape mission with Andy, not emaciated.
But yeah, this idea that consumerism transcends the zombie apocalypse. Even though there's no more scarcity, there's no more competition, we all love our baubles. Let's just talk as our final theme here about fear, right? If the OG Haitian zombie reflected the fear of slavery happening even after death, what are the fears of the 2000s zombies meant to elicit in us? What do they represent? I think there's all the normal ones, you know, the fear of death, the fear of what will happen to our bodies after death. You know, I think most people would want some kind of say in what happens to their corpse after death. Do you want to be buried or cremated or donate your body to science or whatever? But now we live in a world where after death, you're meat that can be acted upon by the people you know and love. I think there's a fear of the lack of control and agency, given that zombies are associated with mindlessness. And I think there's a general fear of societal collapse also. Okay, last major section before we do our closing thoughts. Let's talk a little bit about style. Most zombie films are incredibly predictable and have something resembling this structure. Apocalypse starts, survivors on the run, survivors find a fortress of some kind, survivors are forced to move again. Both of the films we described today follow this structure. And even within this broad structure, there's some pretty predictable micro tropes and even visuals. And the first big one is my all-time favorite zombie trope. Maybe the humans are the real monsters. Maybe we should be more afraid of the humans than we should be of the zombies.
Classic zombie movie trope.
So We saw this with the crazy soldiers in 28 Days Later in the final act. They are so much more frightening than the zombies. The guys with guns with a plan are terrifying.
Our hero works with a zombie, essentially, to, like, fight other humans, antisocial humans.
Yep. In the opening scene of Dawn of the Dead, we see Anna get out of her suburban house, and this guy in a house coat pulls a gun on Anna in the street because he is so discombobulated and paranoid and doesn't know who he can trust or why. And he pulls a gun on his neighbor and is immediately run over by the ambulance. We see the paranoia from the housecoat guy, the total indifference from the ambulance driver. Did you notice in Dawn of the Dead there are various lingering threats of sexual violence, especially from the mall cops? Like there's a scene where after the father is killed, one of the mall cops is staring at the daughter on the security camera as he's crying. You can see in his mind, it's like, here's someone I can take advantage of. Yeah, I mean, even the scene where the father goes insane, he's trying to save his zombie baby, and he and the old lady start shooting each other. All different variations on a theme of we're the real monsters. Classic trope, hiding a bite. You think you're special, you're not, you're endangering everyone else. The expecting father says to his pregnant wife, you're lucky, they could have bitten it off. And you as the viewer are like, you're done, it's over. It's never been more over. And of course, the trope of new survivors clearly being a liability, which we see more in Dawn of the Dead than we do in 28 Days Later, when the moving truck full of new survivors shows up with some obviously bitten people. And of course, any good zombie movie needs to have some over-the-top gore. You know, the classic shot of zombies ripping out intestines that you see in Shaun of the Dead, that you see in Day of the Dead from the 80s. We see a bunch of these in the film. We see a zombie eating intestines in the sporting goods store. We see the white guy impale a zombie with a croquet mallet. The blood drop in the eye in 28 Days Later. Finding new innovative ways to do over-the-top gore and body horror. These films live comfortably with their tropes. Something else I want to talk about style real quick. Zack Snyder, auteur. There's a lot of over-the-top action scenes in Dawn of the Dead. There's a little bit of that 300 style speedy shit in the background with some slower stuff in the foreground. I'm thinking particularly the opening scene with the driving. You see cars driving into gas stations and exploding. There's a lot of slow-mo, especially the slow-mo shots of bullet casings hitting the ground. And, you know, say what you will about Zack Snyder and his politics. He is a pretty adept filmer of action, and many parts of this movie do look cool, even if some of that slow-mo is pretty cheese. Like when the father and the old lady are shooting each other repeatedly in slow motion. It's pretty corny. It looks like it could be from a parody.
The zombie setting is a nice place for Zack Snyder to do the types of violent body horror fantasies that he wants to do, right? You need a subject of this violence, right? And so like in 300, it's like, don't worry, they're Persian. You know, you got to find someone to be the subject of this like violent fantasy. And it's typically like Nazis or like henchmen. But I think zombies offer you like, it's like a victimless crime, right? You get to do violence on like a human shaped organism without having to think about like, oh, does this person have a family? You know, like, were they morally in the right to be killing them? So
do you want to say your thing about contrast?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, Zack Snyder, this guy, he's a man of contrast, if you know what I mean. In the sense that he loves to turn up the contrast on whatever editing software. You know, this is good filmmaking maybe to Zack Snyder, where he's like, colors brighter, shadows darker. Like, you watch this and you're like, good God, everything is very saturated. He's got his own distinctive style for sure.
Yeah. As we're still in our style section, if we were criticizing Zack Snyder a bit, I want to praise the incredible visual world building of 28 Days Later. You want to talk about show don't tell here.
Yes. Oh, Maron.
Yeah. Some of the best scenes to look at in the film are the opening scenes of Cillian Murphy wandering around an abandoned London. We see the overturned red double-decker bus. It's iconic. London has fallen. Britain has fallen. We don't even have the double-deckies. The dude is just scavenging the pound sterling notes from the ground, immediately telling you, like, society has collapsed, the money is meaningless now. We see signs talking about a mass exodus of Britain. He sees the notes on the wall for missing people. He walks into a church and someone's graffitied, "The end is extremely fucking nigh," which is great. And it keeps going. When he gets to Frank's apartment, in rapid succession, we see He's forced to shave with no water. Frank talks about the logistics of going to the bathroom. Toilet doesn't flush. You'll have to go in the bucket. And without even mentioning it, we see a shot of an aquarium with extremely low water. And the fish is just like barely hanging on. Yeah, it's awesome.
We love a show don't tell moment. Seeing like the wall of notes for missing people rather than like someone having to say, yeah, a lot of people are gone missing, you know? Yeah, I've had to use the water for the fish to empty out my shit bucket, you know?
Yup.
We didn't talk about it, but he's trying to get the water from his roof, and he's like, I saw it on the TV, but I've had a harder time myself doing it.
Oh, yeah, trying to gather dew or whatever. Yeah.
We've replaced so much of our brain with, like, TikTok now, and that we're like, oh, shit, how would I do literally anything?
Oh, yeah. If I had to live in a world without YouTube tutorials, I would be fucked. I will also just add on style, these films have exceptional music drops. Zack Snyder puts his opening credits to a Johnny Cash song about the apocalypse. We've already mentioned the two Down with the Sicknesses, both the Richard Cheese Lounge cover and the OG. Dog shit song, but perfect for a zombie movie. And 28 Days Later has this great swelling orchestral song as Cillian Murphy goes Rambo on the compound. It was written originally for the film, if I'm not mistaken. And it was so good that they played it 3 times in 28 Weeks Later, just trying to recapture that magic.
So funny that for 28 Weeks Later, you know, it's the sequel, they finally have more budget. I mean, it's a little potato quality 28 Days Later, the actual like camera equipment that they used, but it's like, yeah, you could double the budget and have a much worse movie if you don't have someone like Alex Garland writing it and Danny Boyle directing it.
Yeah, and instead of Cillian Murphy and Brendan Gleeson, we got Jeremy Renner.
Hawkeye himself. Sweet. Closing thoughts. If you want to be spooked by a movie, art in general is supposed to elicit human emotion.
True. Well said.
That was my data moment. You know, there's like different types of horror movies. You know, you got the ones that are mentally unsettling, like something like Annihilation, where you're just like, oh my God, I'm fucked up. But like not for any like visceral reason. And then you have spooky stories where it's more just like about the acute disgust in like body horror and maybe jump scares. And I think like zombies really are a great setting for that second type of fear if you want to watch a scary movie. And like I said, all of the aestheticized violence is guilt-free. Like I'm thinking about another 2000s aestheticized violence fad, which was the like Nazi zombies setting in Call of Duty. We're actually combining like both of our victimless violence subjects into one with that fantasy.
I can't remember the exact timeline, but there was a Norwegian zombie movie called Dead Snow that involved Nazi zombies on film. And I watched that back in the day. And my teenage brain thought it was pretty fucking sick.
Pretty freaking epic, you ask me.
Yeah, for my closing thoughts, I would say, okay, what do these two zombie movies tell us about the 2000s? Well, there's a bunch of trends and forces that we've mentioned on this pod many, many times, right? We get a remake of existing IP from the 70s. We got the globalization angle with this worldwide zombie boom that hits America and Britain in the 2000s. And we get the kind of manifestation of the fear and paranoia. Who can you trust? Of the War on Terror era as manifested in zombies. That's all fine and good. But one of the things I find most interesting about the zombie boom is how it came and went, at least when it comes to the big screen, the silver screen, the cinema, the pictures, because both of these films turned really nice profits. We've already mentioned 28 Days Later was a pretty low budget production. They made lots of money and then more people tried to make more money with more zombie movies. Okay, makes sense. Over the course of the 2000s, zombie films fizzled out, and I don't think it's necessarily because of zombie fatigue. A lot of people try and say people just got tired of this because they're so formulaic, so they're going to have a short shelf life for audience tolerance of seeing the same story over and over again. But we did see the enormous success of AMC's Walking Dead, so I don't think people were tired of zombies. Why doesn't the genre fatigue apply to superhero movies, which are also formulaic as shit? And right. I think my answer, my champion, is that competition from other significantly cheaper subgenres of horror, specifically torture porn and the found footage film, helped to unseat the zombie film for a major studio. If you're a major studio, you're probably only making a certain number of horror films that you want dropping around Halloween, right? Fucking Paramount Studios isn't going to have a year where they make nothing but horror films. They have a certain number that they're going to make, and they're going to try and turn as much money as they can from them. Zombie films, they require the practical effects, they require lots of extras, they require maybe sometimes multiple shooting locations because, you know, the survivors are on the run, they're in the compound, they're on the run. Day of the Dead, I crunched some numbers. I did a little bit of data analytics for a change, where I tried to calculate ROI based off of budget and then profit. And I was using I was asking Google, I was using the Google AI tool, so don't at me if the math isn't mathing in terms of their marketing budget or whatever the fuck. But Day of the Dead 2004 had a 392% ROI. 28 Days Later had a 1,000% ROI, which sounds pretty good, right? 1,000% ROI? That's awesome. Those are tough numbers to beat. But here's the ROI for some torture porn flicks and one for the OG late 2000s found footage film. Hostel had an ROI of 1,600%. Saw had an ROI of 8,666%. And Paranormal Activity, the most successful independent film of all time, the found footage demon flick, had an ROI of 1.3 million%.
Jesus. That's crazy.
Yeah.
You look at 28 Days Later and you see like how low the production value is and like how successful of a movie that was. And you're like, wow, you know, they really crushed it. And then just like an order of magnitude larger for these torture porn videos compared to even 28 Days Later, which is like in itself like an insanely successful low budget venture.
Yeah. So I think this is probably more significant than audience fatigue for the major studios. Like, yes, zombie films are formulaic as shit, and there's only so many times you can watch the same story. But we've seen from superhero films that we are cultureless swine, and we will tolerate the same thing over and over again, no matter how bad it is. So I think it really is just the market pressures of these horror fans will go see lower budget stuff. So let's just keep cranking out Saw films and Hostels and Paranormal Activities.
You know, I talked up top about how I kind of like admire horror fans for being so interested in like independent films in that genre, right? And I was thinking like if there was like a proliferation of superhero movies that were made by like independent, some of those might actually end up being interesting.
Yeah.
You know, I think the issue is that they're always big studio projects.
Yeah. All right. That's all we got for you today on zombie films. As always, please like, please subscribe, please write us a comment, do all that engagement. It really helps us out a bunch. And if you are saying to yourself, how come they didn't talk about the greatest zombie film of the decade, Shaun of the Dead? Fear not. We will be recording an episode on that in a week where we will talk about the zombie comedy.
The Zomcom.
The Zomcom.
Any genre with tropes is susceptible to a parody, I think.
Exactly.
That's what we'll cover in our Patreon feed episode. And we'll have our yearly Halloween guest appearance from Katie, who was on for Slender Man and Donnie Darko.
Yep.
So fear not. Zombieland, Shaun of the Dead, you know, maybe even some of the other ones. We'll get to that in our Patreon episode.
Sure, yeah. I don't know if you've seen Zombieland, but there's a cameo from one Bill Murray. Have you heard of him? He's pretty epic.
Yeah, he's almost as epic as Chuck Norris. All right, sayonara. Thank you for joining us. Yeah, see you on the Patreon feed.
Ciao, ciao.
Peace.